The conference room was silent, except for the sound of pens scratching against paper. 23 signatures stood between TechVantage Solutions and the biggest contract in our company's history, $900 million. The air smelled like expensive cologne and leather portfolios. All eyes were on the mahogany table where the final document sat. That's when Brandon Hoffman cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension, "I want to address an operational restructuring that will take effect immediately." My stomach dropped. Something in his tone felt wrong. He turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jennifer, your services are no longer required. You've been dead weight for months, and quite frankly, we need actual talent to execute contracts of this magnitude. Security will escort you out." The room froze. Someone gasped. I felt 23 pairs of eyes shift to me. But I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because Brandon Hoffman had just made the most expensive mistake of his career, and he had absolutely no idea. If stories about strategic patience and corporate karma interest you, there's more where this came from. The subscribe button costs nothing but opens doors to stories that prove the long game always wins. My name is Jennifer Hayes, and until that moment, I'd been the Vice President of Infrastructure Operations at TechVantage Solutions for 8 years. The title sounds fancy, but my background was anything but. I grew up in a neighborhood where people fixed their own cars because mechanics were a luxury. My father worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant. My mother cleaned houses during the day and took online courses at night to finish her degree. They taught me 2 things: work solves problems, and understanding people matters more than impressing them. When I started at TechVantage, I wasn't interested in climbing ladders or playing politics. I wanted to build systems that worked, really worked. The kind of infrastructure that didn't just function, but anticipated problems before they became disasters. That philosophy made me strange in the corporate world. While others were optimizing their LinkedIn profiles and networking at golf courses, I was in server rooms, understanding every cable, every protocol, every single point of potential failure. My team wasn't the flashiest department. We didn't generate revenue directly. We were the people who kept the lights on, the data flowing, the promises deliverable. That made us invisible to people like Brandon Hoffman. Brandon joined TechVantage as CEO 14 months before that conference room humiliation. He came from a competitor, brought in by our board to scale the company and unlock enterprise value, corporate speak for making rich people richer. From day one, his style clashed with the culture we'd built. We valued substance, he valued spectacle. We solved problems quietly, he wanted announcements and press releases. Within his first 90 days, he'd replaced 4 department heads with people from his former company. All of them had impressive resumes and zero understanding of how TechVantage actually operated. I watched good people get pushed out. Talented engineers who'd built our systems from the ground up were suddenly not aligned with the vision. The new leadership spoke in buzzwords and held meetings about meetings. But they left my department mostly alone, probably because infrastructure wasn't glamorous enough to matter to them. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was not reading the contracts they inherited when they arrived. 3 years before Brandon's arrival, TechVantage faced a critical problem. We'd landed our first major government contract, a data management system for federal agencies. The requirements were intense: 99.99% uptime, military-grade security, complete data sovereignty. Building that infrastructure through traditional corporate channels would have taken 18 months and cost $7 million we didn't have. Our then CEO, Robert Chen, was desperate. The contract had penalty clauses that would bankrupt us if we failed to deliver on time. I came to him with an unconventional proposal. I would personally finance and build the server infrastructure through my own LLC. TechVantage would lease the capacity from me at cost, no profit margin, just operational expenses. In exchange, I'd retain ownership of the physical infrastructure, and the lease agreement would include ironclad terms protecting both parties. Robert was hesitant. It was unusual, possibly unprecedented, but the alternative was losing everything. We brought in lawyers. They drafted a contract that was airtight. TechVantage got exclusive access to infrastructure that met every specification. I got ownership, control, and a lease agreement that could only be terminated under specific conditions, none of which included the CEO doesn't like you. I spent my savings and took out loans. I bought servers, I negotiated with data center facilities, I personally configured security protocols, I worked 70-hour weeks for months. The system launched 2 weeks early. The government contract wasn't just successful, it was flawless. 0 downtime in 3 years, 0 security breaches, 0 complaints. That infrastructure became the foundation for everything TechVantage built afterward. Every major client we acquired ran on systems connected to that original framework. When we scaled on infrastructure I owned. But here's the thing about being good at your job in a quiet way: people forget you exist. The sales team took credit for client satisfaction. The executives took credit for strategic vision. My department kept everything running so smoothly that people assumed it ran itself. By the time Brandon arrived, most people had forgotten that the servers powering 70% of our operations weren't actually owned by TechVantage. The documentation existed, the contracts were filed, any competent executive doing proper due diligence would have found them. But Brandon wasn't interested in due diligence. He was interested in making moves that looked decisive. The $900 million contract was Harrison Global Enterprises, a manufacturing conglomerate expanding their digital infrastructure. They needed a partner who could handle massive data operations across 14 countries. Brandon saw it as his legacy deal, the crown jewel that would define his tenure and probably launch him toward an even bigger CEO position somewhere else. The entire company spent 6 months preparing the pitch. My team worked back-breaking hours ensuring our infrastructure could handle Harrison's requirements. I personally designed the scalability models. We demonstrated capacity that our competitors couldn't match. When Harrison chose us, Brandon took a victory lap, press releases, all-hands meetings. He was already spending the money in his head. But something shifted in those final weeks before signing. His new chief operating officer, a man named Trevor Walsh, who'd followed Brandon from his previous company, started asking questions about operational efficiency and redundant personnel costs. I heard through back channels that Trevor had convinced Brandon that my department was overstaffed and overpaid, that we were a relic of the company's unfocused past. The morning of the signing, I arrived at headquarters at 6 a.m. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, but I wanted to run final diagnostics. Harrison's team would be monitoring system performance as part of their due diligence process. Everything needed to be perfect. My team had delivered perfection. By noon, I'd confirmed that every server was operating optimally. Data transfer rates exceeded specifications. Security protocols were active and updated. We were ready to support the largest contract in company history. I changed into the suit I'd brought for the ceremony. The signing would take place in the executive conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the one they used for photographic opportunities and board meetings. I wasn't naive. I knew Brandon didn't respect my work, but I'd delivered everything he'd asked for. The contract was happening because my infrastructure made it possible. I thought professional results meant job security. That's how much I still had to learn about people like Brandon Hoffman. The conference room filled with executives, lawyers, and Harrison's leadership team. Their CEO, Angela Morrison, was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for thorough preparation and zero tolerance for incompetence. The mood was celebratory but formal. Assistants arranged documents, lawyers whispered final confirmations. Someone had brought in catering, small sandwiches and sparkling water in glass bottles. I stood near the back, not because I was hiding, but because that's where technical people usually stood during executive ceremonies, close enough to address questions, far enough to stay out of photos. Brandon worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Trevor stood beside him, nodding along, playing the role of supportive number two. Then the documents were ready. Angela Morrison sat down, Brandon sat across from her, the lawyers positioned papers between them. That's when Brandon decided to make his move. "Before we proceed," he said, standing back up, "I want to address an operational restructuring that will take effect immediately." The shift in the room was instant. Angela Morrison's expression went neutral. Her lawyers looked up from their documents. Brandon turned to me. "Jennifer, your services are no longer required. You've been dead weight for months, and quite frankly, we need actual talent to execute contracts of this magnitude. Security will escort you out." The words hit like a physical force. Someone near me inhaled sharply. I saw Angela Morrison's eyes narrow. But Brandon was smiling, proud of himself. Trevor stood beside him, nodding along, playing the role of supportive number two. 2 security guards appeared at the door. They looked uncomfortable. One of them, Thomas, had worked with me on access protocols for the building. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Every instinct screamed to fight back, to defend myself, to explain to everyone in that room how catastrophically stupid this decision was. But I didn't. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a bitter grimace, a genuine smile. Because in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Brandon had no idea what he'd just done. I walked toward the door. The security guards fell into step beside me, not touching, just present, professional. As I passed Angela Morrison, she caught my eye. There was a question in her expression, but she stayed silent. At the doorway, I stopped and turned back. "Brandon," I said calmly, "you should check the infrastructure contracts, specifically the lease agreements for the primary server network." He waved dismissively. "Your replacement will handle any transition issues." "There is no replacement, and there won't be a transition." Trevor stepped forward. "Is that a threat? Because—" "It's not a threat, it's a fact. You'll understand in about 48 hours. Then I left. Behind me, I heard confused murmuring, but Brandon's voice cut through it. "She's just bitter. Let's proceed." I walked through the corridor, past my department where my team was watching through the glass walls, their faces stricken. I gave them a small nod. They knew. I'd briefed my senior engineers that morning, just in case. They'd already backed up their personal files. The lease agreement I'd signed with TechVantage 3 years earlier was very specific. It guaranteed the company exclusive access to my infrastructure as long as I remained employed in a decision-making technical role, or if my departure was voluntary and followed a 90-day transition period. Termination without cause, especially public termination, triggered a different clause. I had the right to revoke access with 72 hours notice. The servers didn't belong to TechVantage. The data centers didn't belong to TechVantage. The security protocols, the redundancy systems, the backup frameworks, all of it was mine. Legally, contractually, completely. When I got to my car, I called my lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in corporate contract law. She'd helped draft the original agreement. "What they did?" she asked, her voice caught between shock and delight. "Fired me, during the Harrison signing, in front of everyone." "Jennifer, you know what this means." "I do. I need you to file the revocation notice. 72-hour clock starts now." "They're going to panic." "Yes," I said, "they are." I went home. My apartment was quiet. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city below. My phone started buzzing around 6 p.m. Calls from coworkers, texts asking what happened, messages from people who'd heard rumors. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say yet. The real chaos would start tomorrow when Brandon and Trevor actually tried to understand the systems they'd just inherited and realized those systems weren't theirs to inherit. Around 8 p.m., I got a text from one of my senior engineers, a man named Amit, who'd been with the company for 6 years. They're asking us to explain the infrastructure documentation. They can't find anything that shows TechVantage owns the servers. Trevor is freaking out. I replied, "They won't find it because it doesn't exist. Call me if they ask you to do anything illegal or unethical." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than fine." And I was. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clear. The political games, the undervaluation, the slow erosion of respect, it was over. Not because I'd quit, but because someone had finally pushed hard enough to activate consequences they couldn't imagine. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls. Most were from TechVantage numbers I didn't recognize. One was from Brandon's assistant. I ignored them and went for a run. When I got back, there was an email from Trevor Walsh. The subject line was, "Urgent, infrastructure documentation request." The email was 3 paragraphs of corporate speak that boiled down to, "We need you to explain where the servers are and how to access the ownership records, because we can't find anything showing their hours." I replied with a single sentence, "Please direct all inquiries to my attorney, Rebecca Torres," followed by her contact information. Then I forwarded the entire thread to Rebecca with a note, "It begins." She called me 10 minutes later laughing. "Jennifer, they have no idea. They actually think this is a documentation problem. How long until they realize? My guess, end of business today. Someone will eventually read the contracts, and then all hell breaks loose. What should I expect? Threats, offers, desperation. Hold your ground. You have all the leverage here." Rebecca was right. At 4:47 p.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Robert Chen, the former CEO who'd approved my original infrastructure deal. "Jennifer," he said, his voice tired. "They called me. The board did. They're trying to understand what happened." And I told them the truth, that you built and owned the infrastructure, that the lease agreement was legitimate and approved by the board at the time, that anyone doing proper due diligence would have known this. Did they listen? They panicked. Brandon is claiming he was never informed. The board is claiming they assumed ownership transferred at some point. Everyone's pointing fingers. "What do you need from me, Robert?" He sighed. "Nothing. I'm not calling to ask for favors. I'm calling to say I'm sorry. You deserved better than what Brandon did. You built something remarkable, and you did it with integrity. Whatever happens next, you've earned the right to make that choice." It was the first genuine apology I'd received. It mattered. "Thank you," I said. For what it's worth, Angela Morrison pulled Harrison out of the contract this afternoon. My heart skipped. She did? She said if TechVantage treats essential personnel that way in public, she doesn't trust their operational stability. The way Brandon fired you during the signing, it spooked her. Then, when the infrastructure questions started circulating, she walked. $900 million. Gone. Not because of me, because of Brandon's ego and incompetence. How's Brandon handling it? Robert laughed bitterly. Not well. The board called an emergency meeting. Trevor's trying to blame your department for poor documentation. Brandon's trying to claim you sabotaged the company. I didn't sabotage anything. I built systems that worked, and I own them legally. I know. The board knows too now, but knowing doesn't solve their problem. We talked for a few more minutes. Robert had left the company 6 months after Brandon arrived, forced out during the leadership purge. He'd landed on his feet, consulting work, advisory boards, the soft retirement of successful executives. Before we hung up, he said, "Whatever you decide to do with the infrastructure, make sure it's your decision, not revenge, not reaction, your decision." It was good advice. The 72-hour notice period ticked down. I spent the time thinking, planning, and fielding increasingly frantic communications through Rebecca. Brandon sent a formal letter claiming my lease agreement was invalid due to conflicts of interest, a legal argument that fell apart immediately since the board had approved everything. Trevor tried a different approach, sending a proposal to buy out my infrastructure at what he called fair market value, a number that was about 40% of what it would cost them to rebuild everything from scratch. The board sent their own lawyers, who at least understood the situation. They requested a meeting to discuss options. I agreed to meet on day 4, after the revocation period ended and their access to my infrastructure officially terminated. That night, at midnight, the lease expired. At 12:01 a.m., my servers began refusing TechVantage's access requests. I wasn't destroying anything. I wasn't deleting data. I was simply enforcing the contract terms. No employment in a technical decision-making role meant no lease agreement, meant no access. Their systems didn't crash immediately. They had some local capacity, some backup systems that weren't running through my infrastructure, but about 70% of their operations depended on servers. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a conference room in Rebecca's law firm. TechVantage sent 3 board members, their general counsel, and, surprisingly, Brandon himself. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good. The board members were professionals, a venture capitalist named Howard Lynn, a former tech executive named Kathleen Price, and a finance expert named Raymond Okoye. They were serious people who understood they were in serious trouble. Howard spoke first. "Ms. Hayes, we appreciate you taking this meeting. We'd like to find a resolution that works for everyone." "I'm listening," I said. Kathleen leaned forward. "First, we want to acknowledge that your termination was handled inappropriately. Brandon has admitted that he didn't review the infrastructure contracts before making that decision." I glanced at Brandon. He was staring at the table, jaw tight. "The board is prepared to offer reinstatement at your previous position with a formal apology and compensation for the disruption." Rebecca and I had anticipated this. "And the infrastructure access?" I asked. "We'd like to reinstate the lease under the original terms," Raymond said. "No," I replied simply. The room went quiet. "No?" Howard repeated. "The original lease was structured the way it was because TechVantage needed help and had limited resources. That's not the situation anymore. If we're renegotiating, we're doing it properly." Kathleen nodded slowly. "What are your terms?" I slid a folder across the table. Rebecca and I had spent 2 days preparing this. Option 1, TechVantage purchases the infrastructure outright at independently appraised fair market value. I transition everything over 90 days and walk away. And option 2, Raymond asked. I return as Chief Technology Officer, not VP of Infrastructure. Full executive authority over all technical operations. Equity package standard for C-suite positions. The infrastructure lease continues, but at market rates, not at cost. I maintain ownership. Brandon finally spoke. "That's insane. You're extorting the company." Rebecca's voice was ice. "Mr. Hoffman, extortion implies illegal coercion. Miss Hayes owns infrastructure that your company depends on. She's under no obligation to provide access at any price. These are generous offers considering your position." Howard held up a hand. "Brandon, you're here as a courtesy. Stay quiet." The rebuke was public and sharp. Brandon's face flushed, but he shut up. Kathleen studied the documents. "These terms are aggressive." "They're fair," I countered. "Option 1 gives you complete ownership and eliminates any dependency on me. Option 2 gives you access to infrastructure you can't replicate quickly while ensuring I'm properly valued. And if we refuse both, then I sell my infrastructure to someone else and you rebuild from scratch. Based on my estimates, that'll take you 18 months and cost significantly more than either option I've presented." Raymond was running numbers on his laptop. She's right. Conservative estimate for rebuilding comparable infrastructure is between $12 and $15 million, and that's if we don't lose clients during the transition. We've already lost Harrison, and 3 other clients have reached out asking about operational stability. If word spreads that we don't actually own our core infrastructure, we'll lose more. The board members exchanged looks. They were doing mental math, weighing options, calculating damage. Finally, Kathleen spoke. "We need to discuss this privately. Can we reconvene tomorrow? Take the time you need, but every day without access is a day your clients are asking questions." We left the conference room. In the elevator, Rebecca grinned. "You were perfect, professional, firm, unshakable." I was terrified, I admitted. "Didn't show. They're going to take option 2, you know." "You think so?" "Option 1 costs them immediate capital they don't have, and they lose your expertise. Option 2 keeps you engaged, maintains infrastructure access, and only costs them operational expenses plus your new compensation. It's the smart play." She was right, of course. That evening, Howard Lynn called me directly. The board voted. We accept option 2 with a few minor modifications to the equity structure. Can your attorney review the amendments? "Yes," I said, keeping my voice neutral even though my heart was racing. "Good. Jennifer, for what it's worth, we should have been paying attention. What happened in that conference room never should have occurred. We failed you as a board." "It was accountability, real and direct." "I appreciate that," I said. "One more thing. The board is moving to remove Brandon as CEO, effective immediately. Trevor Walsh will be departing as well. We'd like to announce your CTO appointment at the same time to signal stability to clients." Understood. The announcement went out 3 days later. TechVantage's board of directors released a statement. "Effective immediately, Brandon Hoffman has stepped down as Chief Executive Officer. Jennifer Hayes has been appointed Chief Technology Officer, joining the executive leadership team. Ms. Hayes brings 8 years of infrastructure excellence and deep institutional knowledge to this role. TechVantage remains committed to operational excellence and client service." The corporate speak hid a messier reality, but the message was clear. The people who'd created the crisis were gone, and someone competent was in charge of the most critical systems. My phone exploded with messages, former colleagues congratulating me, clients reaching out to confirm stability, recruiters suddenly very interested in my career trajectory, and one text from Angela Morrison's office. "Ms. Morrison would like to discuss reinstating the Harrison contract under revised terms. Are you available this week?" I forwarded it to the interim CEO, Howard had taken the role temporarily, with a note, "Should I take this meeting?" His response came in seconds. "Yes." And Jennifer, for what it's worth, we should have been paying attention. What happened in that conference room never should have occurred. We failed you as a board. Understood. The next 6 months were intense. As CTO, I rebuilt the technical leadership team, bringing in people who understood that infrastructure wasn't just about keeping lights on, it was about enabling everything else the company did. I renegotiated the Harrison contract personally, working with Angela Morrison to address her concerns about operational stability. We landed a revised deal worth $750 million, smaller than the original, but still the largest contract in company history. Brandon disappeared from the tech industry headlines. Last I heard, he'd taken a senior advisor role at a private equity firm, corporate purgatory for failed executives. Trevor tried to claim on LinkedIn that he'd successfully transitioned TechVantage to new leadership, a creative interpretation of being fired. Someone from the company reported the post, and he quietly deleted it. My tech company, still mine, still separate, grew as TechVantage grew. The lease payments at market rates provided steady revenue. I hired a small team to manage the technical operations, ensuring I wasn't a single point of failure. And I made sure every contract, every agreement, every operational detail was documented immaculately. Never again would someone dismiss me as dead weight without understanding exactly what they were leasing. There's a moment that stays with me from that whole experience. It happened about a month after I became CTO. I was walking through the office, past the same conference room where Brandon had fired me. They'd renovated it, new furniture, new paint, like changing the decor could erase what happened there. One of the newer employees, someone who joined during the chaos and didn't know the full story, stopped me. "Miss Hayes, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "People say you saved the company, that it almost fell apart before you stepped in." "I didn't save anything," I said. "I just made sure people understood what things actually cost." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "There's a difference between what something's worth and what people think it's worth. Infrastructure, people, expertise, they're invisible until they're gone. Then suddenly, everyone realizes the price." She nodded thoughtfully and walked away. That's really what the whole thing was about. Not revenge, not even justice exactly. It was about making invisible work visible and making sure the people who did that work weren't disposable. A year after the conference room incident, TechVantage held its annual leadership summit. We'd recovered financially. Client retention was strong. The Harrison contract was performing ahead of projections. Howard, who'd decided to stay on as CEO permanently, gave the opening address. He talked about resilience, adaptation, and learning from failures. Then he did something unexpected. He asked me to speak. I hadn't prepared anything. I walked to the front of the room, about 200 people, employees from every department, and tried to figure out what to say. "A year ago," I started, "this company almost imploded. Not because of market conditions or competition, but because we forgot what actually mattered. We forgot that systems are built by people, that trust is earned through consistency, that you can't fake expertise with charisma." The room was silent. We survived because enough people cared about doing the work right, even when it wasn't appreciated. The engineers who maintained systems nobody noticed, the support staff who solved problems quietly, the people who showed up every day and did their jobs with integrity. I saw heads nodding. That's still what matters. Not headlines, not ego, just competent people solving real problems. If we remember that, we'll be fine. The applause was genuine, not polite corporate clapping, but real appreciation. After the summit, Angela Morrison approached me. We'd developed a good working relationship over the months, built on mutual respect and direct communication. "That was a good speech," she said. It was unrehearsed. The best ones are. She paused. "Harrison is expanding our infrastructure needs. We're looking at additional capacity in Asian and European markets. TechVantage can handle that." "I know, but I'm not asking TechVantage. I'm asking you, your infrastructure company. We want to work directly with you on the build-out, then lease capacity back to TechVantage and other partners." It was a significant offer, a chance to expand my business beyond just supporting TechVantage. "I'd need to check conflict of interest policies," I said carefully. "Already did. As long as you're transparent and TechVantage gets priority access at the agreed rates, there's no issue." Howard approved it. We shook hands. "Send me the specifications. I'll put together a proposal." That conversation opened doors I hadn't anticipated. Over the next year, my infrastructure company grew from a single-purpose entity into a legitimate business, serving multiple clients across industries. TechVantage remained my largest customer, but not my only one. The work I'd started as a desperate solution to a funding problem had become something bigger, proof that technical expertise, properly valued and legally protected, could build real equity. 2 years after the firing, I received an unexpected email. Brandon Hoffman wanted to meet for coffee. My first instinct was to delete it, but curiosity won. We met at a neutral cafe, the kind where startup founders and freelancers worked on laptops. He looked older, less polished than the executive who'd dismissed me in front of a room full of people. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm curious why you wanted to meet." He stirred his coffee, not making eye contact. I wanted to apologize, properly, not through lawyers or PR statements. Okay. I was arrogant. I thought leadership meant making bold moves, cutting inefficiencies, projecting confidence. I didn't understand the systems I was managing. I didn't value the people who actually made things work. It was the most honest I'd ever heard him speak. "What happened after you left TechVantage?" I asked. I consulted for a while, realized I didn't know as much as I thought I did, started actually learning how businesses operate instead of just performing leadership. And now? I'm a COO at a mid-sized firm, smaller role, less ego, more learning. It's better. We talked for another hour. Not friends, but not enemies, just two people who'd been on opposite sides of a disaster, both changed by it. Today, 5 years after that conference room, TechVantage is stable and growing. My infrastructure company employs 15 people and supports clients across 3 continents. I'm still CTO at TechVantage, but my equity and infrastructure business mean I'm financially independent. The lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was simpler and more practical. Understand what you're worth, document it properly, and never assume other people will value your work just because it's essential. Invisible work stays invisible until you make it visible, through contracts, through ownership, through standing firm when people try to dismiss you. Brandon taught me that, though he didn't mean to. The conference room where he fired me is now used for new employee orientations. Sometimes I walk past it and remember the moment everything changed, not with anger, but with clarity. That moment was terrifying and humiliating. It was also the moment I stopped waiting for validation and started demanding it. The servers still run, the systems still work, and now everyone knows exactly who built them and what they're worth. That's not revenge. That's just honest accounting. If this story resonated, if you've ever felt undervalued or dismissed for doing essential work quietly, there's a community here that understands. Subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Stories about people who played the long game, documented their worth, and made sure their work spoke louder than anyone's ego. The button's right there when you're ready.